Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start with a simple question. Do you believe God has a plan for your money? Most of us nod when we hear that God has a plan for our lives. We believe He guides our steps, our relationships, even our struggles. But when it comes to money, that's where many of us hesitate. We act as if our finances are separate from faith. But let me tell you, God never intended it that way. Money is not just numbers on a bank screen. It's not just bills in your wallet. It's a tool, a test, a trust, and how you handle it reveals how much you trust Him. Think about it. When you're stressed about bills, when you're drowning in debt, when you're anxious about the future, does it feel like money controls you instead of you controlling money? But God doesn't want money to be your master. He wants it to be your servant. Here's the truth. Money makes a terrible God, but a powerful servant. Let me give you a picture. Imagine holding a shovel. You can use it to dig a foundation and build a home, or you can use it to dig a hole so deep that you can't climb out. Money is that shovel. It depends on how you use it. Now, let's be real. Some of us have prayed for financial breakthrough, but never changed our financial behavior. We want miracles, but we don't want discipline. We want blessings, but we don't want boundaries. Can I be honest? God's plan for your money is not just about giving you more. It's about teaching you to manage what you already have. Jesus talked more about money than about heaven and hell combined. Why? Because He knew money pulls at our hearts. He said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." If your heart follows your money, does it make sense that God cares about where you put it? So what's God's plan for your money? It's simple but life-changing. Provide for your needs. God doesn't want you living in constant lack. Free you from debt and slavery. Because debt is bondage, and He called you to freedom. Teach you generosity. Not because He needs your money, but because giving shapes your heart. Prepare you for impact. Your money is meant to bless more than just you. It's meant to bless others. I remember a man who struggled for years with money. He worked hard, but every month ended with nothing left. One day, he decided to stop asking only, "How much can I get?" and started asking, "How can I honor God with what I already have?" Slowly, he paid off his debts. He began giving, even when it was small. Today, he doesn't just survive, he thrives. Not because he won the lottery, but because he aligned his money with God's plan. Friends, money can't buy peace. It can't buy joy. It can't buy purpose. But when you put your money in God's hands, it becomes a seed, and seeds grow. So I ask you, are you willing to trust God, not just with your soul, but with your salary, not just with your prayers, but with your paycheck? The truth is, money will always move. It will either move toward waste or toward purpose, toward fear or toward faith. The choice is yours. But remember this, God's plan for your money is never to harm you, but to prosper you, to give you hope, to give you a future. So tonight, I leave you with this. Don't let money master you. Don't let it control your peace. Instead, surrender it to God. Let Him direct it. Let Him multiply it. Let Him turn it into a testimony. Because when you trust God with your money, you will discover it was never just about money. It was always about your heart. Here are some key points related to this. Money is a tool, test, and trust, not your master. God's plan is to provide for your needs, not just your wants. Debt is bondage. Financial freedom is part of God's design. Giving is not about losing. It's about shaping your heart and blessing others. Aligning finances with God's principles leads to peace and impact. Trusting God with money reveals your true trust in Him. When you think about money, what comes to mind first? For some, it's freedom. For others, it's stress. For many, it's survival. We wake up every morning and chase after it. We make decisions around it. And we measure our lives by how much we do or don't have. But what if I told you that money was never meant to be the final destination? That it was never the real prize? Instead, it's something far more powerful and far more revealing, a tool, a test, and a trust. Picture this for a moment. A father gives his young child a small allowance, just a few coins each week. To the child, it feels like the world. But the father isn't testing whether the child can become rich with it. He's watching to see what the child does with it. Will the child waste it all on candy the moment he gets it? Or will he learn to save, to share, to plan? The allowance itself isn't the point. The lesson behind it is. That's exactly how God looks at money in our lives. The dollar in your hand is not the treasure. It's the test. Let me ask you, have you ever noticed how money magnifies who you really are? If someone is selfish when they're broke, they will still be selfish when they're rich. If someone is generous when they have little, they will still find ways to give when they have much. Money doesn't change your character. It reveals it. That's why it's a test. The way you use it, the way you cling to it, the way you release it, all of it shows where your heart truly rests. But it's not only a test, it's also a tool. Think about a hammer. In the right hands, it builds a house. In the wrong hands, it destroys one. Money works the same way. With it, you can build schools, feed families, create opportunities, support dreams, change lives. Or with it, you can feed addictions, fuel greed, create division, and leave destruction behind. The money itself is neutral, but the purpose you give it determines the impact it will have. That's why God places in our hands and whispers, "What will you do with it?" I once met a man who worked long hours just to keep up with bills. He was exhausted, frustrated, and bitter because it seemed like no matter how hard he worked, money slipped through his fingers. One day he told me, "I just don't understand why God won't bless me financially." And I asked him gently, "What are you doing with what you already have?" He was silent, because the truth is, sometimes we want God to trust us with more when we haven't been faithful with little. If money is a trust, then how we handle is a reflection of our faithfulness. The Bible says, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." That verse is not about punishment. It's about preparation. God doesn't withhold. He prepares us to handle what he longs to release. Imagine someone hands you a seed. It doesn't look like much, does it? But inside that seed is a tree. Inside that tree are thousands of fruits, and inside those fruits are countless more seeds. But if you throw that seed away or bury it carelessly, you lose everything it was meant to become. Money is that seed. It carries potential beyond what you see today. The question is, will you treat it as worthless, or will you plant it where it can grow? Here's another image. A company hires a manager to oversee one of their branches. The money, the staff, the resources, they all belong to the company. The manager doesn't own them. He's entrusted with them. If the manager wastes the resources, cheats the system, or neglects his responsibilities, he will be removed. But if he proves faithful, he will be promoted. That's how God treats us with money. He's the owner, we're the managers. And the way we manage reveals whether we're ready for more. Now let's be real. For some of us, money has become a master. We check our accounts constantly, worry about tomorrow, compare ourselves to others, and let money dictate our moods. If the paycheck is good, we're happy. If it's short, we're anxious. If the bills pile up, we feel defeated. But money was never meant to be your master. It was meant to be your servant. That's the difference between bondage and freedom. You see, when money is your master, it controls your peace. But when money is your servant, you control it with purpose. And purpose brings peace. Think about a family struggling at the end of the month. They barely cover the rent. They fight over expenses. The children feel the tension at the dinner table. Now imagine that same family slowly shifting their perspective. Instead of seeing money as something that controls them, they begin to see it as something entrusted to them. They start small. They budget. They set aside even a little for giving. They make sacrifices not out of fear, but out of faith. And as months pass, the weight begins to lift. They realize that the blessing wasn't just in having more money. It was in learning how to steward the money they already had. Here's a powerful truth. God doesn't measure your worth by your wealth, but he does measure your faith through your stewardship. A man with $5 can be more faithful than a man with 5 million. It's not about the amount. It's about the attitude. And that's why money is such a perfect test. It doesn't lie. It shows whether we trust God or whether we trust only ourselves. I once read about a wealthy businessman who lost nearly everything in a financial crash. People expected him to fall apart. But when interviewed, he said something remarkable. The money was never really mine. It was God's. I was just managing it. If he wants me to rebuild, I'll rebuild. If he wants me to serve in a different way, I'll serve. That kind of perspective doesn't come from the world. It comes from seeing money as a trust from God. So ask yourself, what has money revealed about you lately? Does it show gratitude or greed? Fear or faith? Generosity or grasping? If your bank statements could speak, what story would they tell about your heart? Because make no mistake, they do tell a story. And maybe that's why Jesus spoke so much about money. Not because he wanted to guilt us or shame us, but because he knew money is the mirror of the soul. He knew that when we get this right, when we see money not as our identity, not as our master, but as a tool, a test, and a trust, everything changes. We stop living in constant worry. We stop being slaves to debt and comparison. We start walking in freedom. And that freedom allows us to focus on what really matters, loving God, loving people, and making an eternal impact with temporary resources. Because in the end, the money you hold in your hand today will not last forever. But what you do with it, the lives you touch, the seeds you plant, the faith you display, that will echo into eternity. Debt. Just the sound of the word feels heavy, doesn't it? Like chains clinking in the background, reminding you of something you owe, something unfinished, something hanging over your head. And isn't that exactly how it feels when you're in debt? A weight that follows you everywhere. You smile at work, but deep down you're calculating bills. You sit at dinner with family, but your mind is racing through numbers. You go to bed at night, but sleep doesn't come easily because you hear that whisper. You still owe. You still owe. Debt is not just a financial burden. It's an emotional prison. And that's why God's plan has always been freedom, not bondage. I remember meeting a young couple who had just gotten married. They were in love, full of dreams, ready to build their future. But there was something sitting silently in their marriage from day one. Debt. Credit card bills from the wedding, student loans, even car payments. Every month. As soon as they got paid, most of the money was gone before they could even breathe. They didn't talk about it much at first. They thought, we'll manage somehow. But slowly, the pressure started showing up in arguments. He wanted to save for a home. She wanted to travel before kids came. But their choices weren't really choices, because the debt had already chosen for them. That's what debt does. It steals your options. It takes away your ability to dream freely. It becomes the invisible master of your decisions. The Bible says, the borrower is slave to the lender. That's not just poetry. It's reality. When you owe, you're not free. Someone else holds a piece of your future. And God didn't create you for slavery. He created you to walk in freedom, to make decisions not out of fear or obligation, but out of vision and faith. Think about it like this. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with bricks. Every brick is a loan, a bill, a payment you have to make. At first, maybe it doesn't feel too heavy. You think, I can handle this. But as you keep adding bricks, the weight gets unbearable. You start to walk slower. You get tired quicker. And before you know it, you can't even stand upright. That's debt. And some people are living their entire lives hunched over, dragging themselves through every day under that invisible backpack. But here's the beautiful thing. God never meant for you to live this way. Debt might be common in the world, but it was never part of God's design for his people. When you read the stories in Scripture, you see a God who sets captives free, who cancels debts, who calls people out of slavery into liberty. That's his heart. And even when it comes to money, his heart hasn't changed. I once heard about a man who had nearly $40,000 in credit card debt. He admitted he had spent recklessly for years, buying things to impress people, chasing comfort, and living far beyond his means. When the bills piled up, he started avoiding the mailbox because he couldn't bear to see another statement. But one day, he said he felt God whisper, "It's time to stop running. It's time to face it." So he made a decision. He cut up his cards. He sold things he didn't need. He took a second job. And little by little, year by year, he paid it all off. I'll never forget what he said at the end. The freedom I feel today is worth more than anything I ever bought with that debt. That's the truth. Debt promises freedom in the moment, but steals it for years. But discipline, sacrifice, and God's wisdom may feel hard in the moment, but bring lasting freedom that money can't buy. And let's be honest, we live in a world that almost encourages debt. Buy now, pay later. 0 down, interest free. You deserve it. The commercials scream at us that happiness can be bought on credit. But what they don't show you is the anxiety of minimum payments, the shame of mounting bills, the sleepless nights when you realize you're stuck. That's why it's so dangerous. Debt looks like a gift at first, but ends up being a trap. It's like sugar water to a thirsty man. It tastes sweet for a moment, but it doesn't quench the thirst. It only makes you weaker. But imagine this with me. Imagine living without that weight. Imagine opening your paycheck and realizing every dollar in it is free to be used with purpose, not pre-promised lenders. Imagine dreaming with your spouse and actually having the freedom to take steps toward those dreams without a shadow hanging over you. Imagine being able to give when God nudges your heart, because your money isn't already tied up. That's what financial freedom feels like. And that's what God desires for you. Not so you can live selfishly, but so you can live abundantly. Let me take you back to that young couple I mentioned earlier. After years of struggle, they decided to make a radical shift. They sat down and faced the numbers they had been avoiding. They created a plan. They said no to things their friends were saying yes to. They made sacrifices that sometimes hurt. And after a long, hard journey, they finally became debt-free. I'll never forget their testimony. The husband said, "For the first time in years, we feel like we're steering our own ship." And the wife added with tears in her eyes, "It feels like we can breathe again." That's what freedom sounds like. It's the sound of chains falling off. And here's the deeper truth. Debt is not just about numbers. It's about your heart. Because debt doesn't only limit your money. It limits your peace, your joy, and even your trust in God. When you're buried in debt, fear often speaks louder than faith. But when you begin to walk toward freedom, you discover something incredible. You're not just paying off bills. You're breaking off chains. I know someone listening right now may feel overwhelmed, thinking, "But my debt is too big. I'll never be free." Let me tell you, that's exactly what the enemy wants you to believe. But freedom doesn't happen overnight. It happens one step at a time. Just like climbing a mountain, you don't reach the top in one leap. You take it one step, one payment, one sacrifice, one decision at a time. And before you know it, you look back and realize how far you've come. So ask yourself this. Are you living as a master over your money or as a slave to it? Are you directing your dollars or are your debts directing you? Because here's the promise. God's plan has never been for you to be in bondage. His plan is for you to walk in freedom. And the same God who breaks chains in every area of life can also break them in your finances. Because in the end, debt is temporary, but freedom is eternal. And the freedom you fight for today doesn't just bless you. It blesses your children, your family, and generations after you. It's not just about numbers. It's about legacy. And when you choose freedom, you don't just pay off a bill. You step into the life God always intended for you. Generosity. Even the word itself feels light, doesn't it? It carries a warmth, a sense of open hands and open hearts. But here's the truth. Generosity isn't just about money leaving your pocket. It's about something deeper leaving your soul. It's not about subtraction. It's about multiplication. When you give, you don't just lose something. You gain something that money itself could never buy. That's why God's plan for your money always includes generosity. Not because he needs it, but because giving shapes your heart. Think about it for a moment. When a child is born, what's the very first thing they do? They cling. Their little fists are tight, gripping anything they can. It's natural to hold on. But when you grow, when you mature, when you learn to trust, you slowly begin to open your hands. Spiritually, the same thing is true. Most of us spend our lives clinging to what we have, terrified of letting go. But God gently teaches us that real life begins not when we hold tightly, but when we open freely. I once heard a story about a woman who lived in a small town. She didn't have much. She worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. But every Sunday, she would put a small envelope in the offering plate. One day, the pastor asked her why she was so consistent, even when she had so little. She smiled and said, Because giving reminds me that my money isn't my master. It reminds me that God is. That struck me deeply. She wasn't giving out of excess. She was giving out of faith. And her generosity wasn't just shaping her bank account. It was shaping her heart into one of trust, gratitude, and peace. Generosity does something inside of us that nothing else can. It breaks greed. It silences fear. It shifts our focus from self-preservation to love. Have you ever noticed how tightly fear and money are tied together? We say, I can't give because what if I don't have enough for tomorrow? But that's exactly why giving is powerful. It pushes back against the lie that tomorrow is in your control. It declares, God, I trust you more than I trust my wallet. Imagine for a moment a clenched fist. With that fist, you can protect what you already have. But that same fist is also closed off to receiving anything more. Now imagine an open hand. Yes, something can leave, but something greater can also enter. That's the picture of generosity. When your hands are open, not only can you give, but you also make room for blessings you could have never grasped on your own. I remember a businessman who made millions. He lived in luxury, but he admitted one day that he never felt satisfied. No matter how much he earned, it was never enough. Then one year, during a holiday season, he decided to sponsor food baskets for struggling families. At first, it was just a donation, nothing emotional. But when he went to deliver those baskets himself and saw the tears in a mother's eyes as she realized her children would eat that night, something shifted inside him. He told me later, that moment filled me more than any deal I've ever closed. He discovered what many of us forget. Money spent on self may satisfy for a moment, but money given away leaves a joy that lingers. Jesus said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. We nod at those words, but do we really believe them? Our culture tells us the opposite, that blessing comes from receiving, accumulating, building bigger barns. But Jesus flips the script. The blessing is not in what you gather, but in what you scatter. And when you scatter seeds of generosity, you plant a harvest of joy, peace, and purpose that money itself could never buy. Let me tell you about another woman, a single mom who barely scraped by. She worked late shifts, raised her kids alone, and lived paycheck to paycheck. One day at church, she overheard a family talking about how they didn't have enough to buy winter coats for their children. Without hesitation, she went home, looked at her closet, and pulled out 2 jackets she was saving for her own kids. They weren't brand new, but they were warm and in good condition. The next week, she quietly gave them to the family. Months later, she admitted that was one of the hardest things she had done, but also one of the most fulfilling. She said, I thought I was giving away coats, but what I really gave was love. That's the secret. Generosity is not about the amount. It's about the heart behind it. Sometimes we think, I'll give when I have more. But generosity isn't about wealth. It's about willingness. The truth is, if you don't give when you have little, you probably won't give when you have much. Because generosity isn't born out of abundance. It's born out of faith. That's why Jesus celebrated the widow who gave 2 small coins, saying she gave more than the rich who gave out of excess. It wasn't the amount. It was the sacrifice, the trust, the love behind it. Have you ever noticed how giving changes the atmosphere in a room? Imagine sitting in a cafe. You see someone quietly pay for another person's meal. The recipient smiles, maybe even tears up. The people around feel inspired. Strangers are suddenly connected. That's the power of generosity. It ripples outward, affecting not just the giver and receiver, but everyone who witnesses it. It creates light in places that were once ordinary. And generosity doesn't just bless others. It heals us. A man once confessed that he struggled with greed his whole life. He hoarded, saved, and clung to every dollar, terrified of losing it. But one day, a mentor challenged him. The only way to kill greed is to give. At first, he resisted, but slowly, he began to give small amounts, then larger ones. Over time, he noticed something incredible. His fear began to fade. He realized that greed had been the chain around his heart, and generosity was the key that set him free. So, let me ask you, what does your giving say about your heart? Is it tight, closed, fearful? Or is it open, trusting, and free? Because in the end, Generosity is not about God needing your money. It's about you needing to let go. It's about learning to trust that God is the ultimate provider, that He will take care of you, and that no act of generosity ever goes unnoticed. I want you to imagine your life as a river. If water flows into it but never flows out, it becomes stagnant, murky, lifeless. But when water flows both in and out, the river stays fresh, alive, and powerful. Your money, your blessings, your resources, they were never meant to just flow in. They were meant to flow through you, to keep life moving, to bring refreshment to others. That's why generosity matters. Because when you hold it all in, you suffocate. But when you let it flow, you thrive. And maybe, just maybe, that's the secret to joy. Not in hoarding, not in clinging, not in fearing, but in opening your hands and saying, God, whatever I have, it's yours. Use it. And when you live that way, you discover something incredible. Your money doesn't just build a life, it builds a legacy. When we think about money, most of us think about survival. We think about rent, groceries, tuition, and bills stacked on the counter. We think about gas in the tank and food on the table. And of course, God cares about those things. He cares about your daily bread. But if you stop there, if you believe money is only meant to cover your needs, then you're missing the bigger picture. Because God's plan for your money was never meant to end with you. It was always meant to flow through you. Your money is meant to bless more than just your life. It's meant to touch others, to build others, to lift others, to ripple far beyond your own reach. I once heard someone say, "What you keep is all you'll ever have. What you give is what will live beyond you." That struck me because it's true. You can work your whole life, earn a fortune, buy the finest things, and yet the day you leave this earth, every possession stays behind. But the lives you touched, the people you helped, the seeds you planted, those live on. Money in your account eventually disappears, but money used to bless others leaves fingerprints on eternity. Think about the story of the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. To him, it was just his lunch. To the disciples, it looked like nothing compared to the crowd. But when he placed it in the hands of Jesus, that little became more than enough. Thousands were fed, and there were even baskets left over. Do you see the lesson? What you hold on to may feel like survival, but what you release to God becomes supply not just for you, but for many. That boy's lunch wasn't just about feeding himself. It was about feeding a multitude. Your money has the same potential when you choose to see it as a channel for blessing instead of a container for yourself. I remember a man who grew up poor. He made a promise to himself that one day he would be rich enough to never feel lack again. And he worked hard, climbed the corporate ladder, and eventually built the life he once dreamed of. But something strange happened. He still felt empty. One day, he walked past a homeless man sitting outside a diner. For reasons he couldn't explain, he stopped, bought the man a hot meal, and sat with him while he ate. That simple act shook him. He said later, "For the first time, I realized money wasn't just for me. It was for moments like that." That day, he discovered a secret most people miss. Money finds its greatest meaning not in what it buys for you, but in what it provides for others. And isn't that how God works? He blesses you so you can bless others. He fills your cup so it can overflow. The overflow is not wasted. It's designed to reach the thirsty around you. When you hoard it all, you cut off the very flow of blessing. But when you release it, you become part of something bigger than yourself. Picture 2 farmers. One farmer harvests his crops and stores everything in his barn. He feels secure, but eventually his grain spoils, rats come, and what once seemed like security turns into loss. The other farmer harvests, stores what his family needs, but also shares with his neighbors. He plants seeds in surrounding fields. And next season, his harvest multiplies because what he gave away produced more life. That's the principle God built into generosity and blessing. Money meant only for yourself eventually runs dry, but money used to bless others keeps multiplying. I've seen it time and time again. Families who struggle financially but still chose to support a missionary or help a neighbor, and somehow their needs were always met. Business owners who decided to give a portion of profits away and found their businesses thriving in unexpected ways. Parents who taught their children to give and watched those children grow up with open hearts instead of clenched fists. These stories remind us that God never blesses you just to make you comfortable. He blesses you so you can become a channel of His love. And maybe you've experienced it yourself. Think back to a time when you gave, whether it was money, food, clothes, or time, and you saw the impact on someone's face. That smile, that gratitude, that relief. Didn't it do something inside you? Didn't it feel like your heart grew in that moment? That's because your money fulfilled its real purpose. It wasn't about paper or numbers. It was about connection, about love and action, about showing God's care through your hands. Let me tell you about a community I once read about. A small town had fallen on hard times after the main factory closed. Jobs were scarce, families were struggling, and hopelessness spread like a fog. But then something remarkable happened. A group of people in the town decided to pool their resources, not just to survive, but to help others. They set up a food pantry, helped parents with school supplies, and even started small programs to train people for new jobs. Slowly, the town began to change. People found hope again. And it wasn't because a millionaire swooped in. It was because ordinary people realized their money was meant to bless more than just themselves. Together, they created a ripple that revived their entire community. That's the power you carry every time you hold money. You can look at it and think, this is mine. Or you can look at it and think, this is my chance to bless someone else. One mindset leads to fear and isolation. The other leads to joy and impact. And here's the irony. When you use your money to bless others, you end up richer in ways you could never calculate. Richer in relationships, in peace, in purpose, in joy. So let me ask you, who could your money bless today? Maybe it's as simple as buying groceries for a struggling single parent. Maybe it's paying for a stranger's meal, or supporting a ministry, or helping a student afford books. Maybe it's bigger. Funding wells in villages without clean water, sponsoring children in need, or investing in causes that change lives. The amount doesn't matter. The heart does. Because every time you bless someone else, you remind the world that money doesn't own you. You own it, and you use it for something eternal. And perhaps that's why God insists on generosity. Not to empty you, but to free you. Not to take from you, but to multiply through you. Because when you understand that your money is meant to bless more than just you, you discover that you were never meant to live a small, self-centered life. You were meant to live a life of impact. And impact never ends with you. It always begins with you and flows outward. So imagine your money as water in a pitcher. You could pour it into your own glass, and it would quench your thirst for a moment. But if you keep pouring into others, you create streams, rivers, and lakes that give life far beyond yourself. That's what God designed money for. Not just to sustain you, but to sustain many through you. Because in the end, when your days are done, no one will remember the shoes you bought, the gadgets you owned, or the accounts you built. But they will remember if you were the one who helped them in their darkest moment, who gave when they had nothing, who showed love when they felt forgotten. That's the kind of legacy money was meant to create. That's the kind of blessing that never runs out. Money is powerful, but it's also limited. It can buy a house, but it can't make a home. It can pay for medicine, but it can't guarantee healing. It can cover the cost of a wedding, but it can't create love. And deep down, we all know this. We've seen people with more money than they can spend, yet their hearts are restless, their marriages are broken, their spirits are heavy. That's because money can never buy peace. It can never buy joy. It can never buy purpose. And if you've been chasing those things with money, you already know the emptiness that comes when you realize the price tag doesn't cover the soul. I remember reading about a famous celebrity who had everything the world says should make you happy. Mansions, cars, fame, endless wealth. From the outside, she looked untouchable. But in a candid interview, she admitted, "I go to bed every night with tears in my eyes because I don't know who I really am, and no amount of money has ever fixed that." Isn't that heartbreaking? Millions of dollars in the bank, but still bankrupt in peace. That's the cruel trick money plays. It promises fulfillment but delivers emptiness when you expect it to do what only God can. Peace is not bought, it's received. It comes from knowing you are secure in God's hands, no matter what your balance sheet looks like. Joy is not purchased. It's discovered in moments when gratitude outweighs circumstance. And purpose? Purpose is not something you can swipe a card for. It's a calling planted in your soul that only God can awaken. Money may enhance those things, but it can never create them. Think of it this way. Imagine standing in the middle of a raging storm with an umbrella. The umbrella might give you some protection, but it doesn't stop the storm. That's money. It shields you from certain things. Maybe helps with comfort, maybe eases some pressure, but it doesn't calm the storm inside your heart. Only God can do that. And when you put money in the place of God, you'll find yourself wet, cold, and disappointed, realizing you trusted the wrong thing. I once knew a man who worked 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. He built his own business from scratch, and he was proud of what he accomplished. But his kids grew up barely seeing him. His wife grew distant. His health began to crumble. And one day he confessed, "I thought if I could just make enough money, we'd all be happy. But I look around, and I realize I've lost the very things money was supposed to protect." That's the tragedy of chasing wealth without trusting God. It costs you the things money can never replace. On the flip side, I've also met people with very little by the world's standards who walk in a peace and joy that money could never manufacture. I once sat in a small village with a family who lived in a simple one-room home. Their furniture was worn, their clothes faded. Yet when they invited me in, they laid out the little food they had and shared it with smiles that could light up the room. There was laughter, there was gratitude, there was warmth. They had almost nothing in material wealth, yet they were rich in spirit. And it hit me. Peace and joy don't flow from possessions. They flow from perspective. They flow from trusting God as a provider, not money as a savior. Purpose, too, is often misunderstood. People chase careers, titles, and paychecks believing that the right salary equals the right purpose. But purpose is not what you earn. It's what you live for. You can earn a fortune and still wonder, why am I here? Or you can earn modestly and live every day knowing you are exactly where God wants you, doing exactly what He called you to do. That's why some of the most fulfilled people in this world aren't the richest. They're the ones who have aligned their hearts with God's mission, using what they have to serve something greater than themselves. There's a story about a teacher who never made much money. By society's measure, she was just ordinary, but she poured her life into her students, encouraged them, believed in them, and planted seeds of hope in their hearts. Years later, many of those students became leaders, doctors, teachers, and difference makers. At her funeral, the room was overflowed with lives she had impacted. She may not have left behind millions in a bank account, but she left behind something far greater, an eternal legacy. Her purpose was never about money. It was about meaning, and meaning is priceless. So here's the question. What are you trusting today? Are you trusting money to give you what only God can? Are you holding on to it as if your peace depends on it? Your joy rises and falls with it. Your purpose is defined by it, because if you are, you'll always find yourself restless. Money will rise and fall. Account will grow and shrink. Opportunities will come and go. But God remains steady, and His peace, joy, and purpose never run out. I want you to picture this. Imagine standing on a boat in the middle of the ocean. If your trust is in money, it's like clinging to a flimsy life jacket. It may keep you afloat for a while, but it won't take you to shore. But if your trust is in God, it's like having an anchor that holds you steady when waves crash, and a captain who knows exactly where you're headed. Which would you rather depend on, the temporary life jacket or the eternal anchor? And maybe that's why Jesus said, you cannot serve both God and money. Not because money is evil, but because it makes a lousy master. It will never give you what it promises. It will drain you, distract you, and disappoint you. But when you serve God and trust Him with your money, suddenly the pressure lifts. Money becomes what was always meant to be, a tool, not a god, a resource, not a ruler. And in that shift, you find freedom. I think of the countless people who have told me, when I finally stopped obsessing over money and started trusting God, I felt a peace I can't explain. That's the moment when the weight breaks. That's when you realize you don't need to chase more to feel whole. You need to rest in the one who is already enough. So let me ask you this. If money disappeared tomorrow, would you still have peace? Would you still have joy? Would you still feel purpose? If your answer is no, then maybe it's time to shift your trust. Because God's plan has never been for you to be enslaved to numbers in a bank. His plan is for you to know that your worth, your hope, your calling are all secure in Him. In the end, money can buy comfort, but it can't buy contentment. It can buy entertainment, but it can't buy joy. It can buy influence, but it can't buy purpose. Those are gifts only God can give. And when you learn to trust Him more than your wallet, you'll finally understand what true wealth feels like. It's not measured in dollars. It's measured in peace, in joy, in purpose that money can never purchase. Trust is easy to talk about, but hard to live out, especially when it comes to money. We say we trust God with our hearts, our families, our future. But the moment a bill comes due or an unexpected expense shows up, fear grips us. Suddenly, we check the numbers in our account more often than we check the promises of God. It's almost as if money becomes a thermometer of our faith. When it rises, we feel secure, but when it dips, we panic. Yet here's the truth. Nothing reveals the depth of our trust in God more clearly than how we handle our money. Imagine a child standing at the edge of a pool. The father is in the water, arms wide open, calling out, "Jump! I've got you." The child hesitates, looking at the water, calculating the risk, afraid of the unknown. But then, with a moment of courage, the child leaps and discovers the father's arms are stronger than the fear. That's what it's like when you trust God with your money. You jump. Even when the numbers don't make sense, even when the fear of not having enough whispers in your ear, and you discover His arms are strong enough to catch you. Money has a way of showing us who we really trust. When we cling to it tightly, when we hoard out of fear, when we spend recklessly to fill the emptiness inside, what we're really saying is, "God, I don't believe you'll provide." But when we surrender it, when we honor Him first, when we use it to bless others, we are declaring, "God, I believe you are my source, not my salary. You are my provider, not my paycheck." That's why giving is so powerful. Not because God needs your money, but because giving exposes your trust. I once knew a woman who worked a modest job, barely making enough to get by. Every month was tight, and every expense felt like a mountain. Yet she decided that no matter what, she would honor God with the first portion of her income. People around her thought she was crazy. They said, "You can't afford to give when you have so little." But she would smile and reply, "I can't afford not to." Over time, she began to see doors open, unexpected opportunities, unexpected provision, even unexpected peace. She didn't suddenly become a millionaire, but she became rich in trust. And that trust gave her a confidence that money alone could never provide. Contrast that with another story. A businessman I once met had more than enough. He made in a week what some people didn't make in a year. His accounts were full, his investments strong, yet he lived in constant anxiety. Every decision about money filled him with dread. "What if I lose it?" he would say. "What if it all disappears?" He trusted money more than God, and because of that, peace always slipped through his fingers. Isn't it ironic? The woman with little was full of faith, while the man with much was full of fear. That's the difference trust makes. Trusting God with money is like planting seeds. When you plant a seed, you bury it in the ground, and from the outside, it looks like you've lost it. You can't see what's happening beneath the soil. Days go by, sometimes weeks, before anything breaks through the surface. But underground, something powerful is happening. The seed is taking root, drawing strength, preparing to grow. That's what it's like when you give, when you save with discipline, when you follow God's wisdom instead of fear. It may look like you're losing, but in reality, you're setting the stage for growth. There's a verse that says, "Test me in this, and see if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you won't have room for it." Think about that. God is saying, "Trust me with your money and watch what I can do." It's the only place in Scripture where He invites us to test Him. Why? Because He knows how tightly we hold on to money. He knows it's the area where trust is tested the most. But trust is not just about giving. It's about how you view money as a whole. When you budget with integrity, when you refuse to cut corners, when you choose honesty over gain, you're saying, "God, I trust your way is better than shortcuts." When you rest at night without obsessing over every dollar, you're saying, "God, I trust you are in control." Trust is not a one-time decision. It's a daily posture. I remember a time in my own life when I was faced with a choice. A new opportunity came my way, promising a significant financial increase, but it came with strings attached. Compromises I knew would take me away from God's plan. On paper, it looked like the smart choice. The numbers added up, the comfort was appealing. But in my heart, I felt the Spirit whisper, "Do you trust me to provide another way?" It was one of the hardest decisions I've made, but I walked away from the deal. For months, I wondered if I made a mistake. But slowly, God opened other doors, ones that aligned with my values, ones that didn't compromise my peace. And looking back now, I realize He was teaching me that trust is not about what you see, but who you believe in. So many of us say, "God, I trust you," but the bank account is where the truth comes out. Because if you trust Him with eternity, why not with expenses? If you trust Him with your soul, why not with your salary? It's not about the amount you have. It's about the heart behind it. A little surrendered is greater than a fortune withheld. And maybe that's the question you need to wrestle with today. When you look at your money, does it reveal trust or fear? Does it show surrender or control? Does it testify that you believe God is your provider? Or does it expose that you've placed your hope in wealth? At the end of the day, trust in money fades. Economies crash. Currencies lose value. Jobs disappear. But trust in God stands. He never changes. He never fails. He never runs out. And when your finances rest in His hands, you discover freedom that no paycheck can give and no debt collector can take away. So when you think about money, don't just think about numbers. Think about trust. Think about the Father at the edge of the pool, arms wide open, calling you to leap, because in that leap, in that surrender, you'll discover that He's been waiting to catch you all along. And when He does, you'll finally see that money was never the measure of your security. Trust was. And trust will always reveal who your God really. Let me leave you with this. Money will fade, but trust remains. Wealth will pass, but faith endures. Dollars rise and fall, but God never changes. And the way you handle money is not just about numbers. It's about your heart. So tonight, I'm asking you to decide. Will you keep clinging to money as if it can save you, or will you finally release it and trust the one who never fails? Will you keep letting fear drive your financial choices, or will you dare believe that God's arms are strong enough to carry you? Don't wait until the storm comes to find your anchor. Don't wait until the account is empty to discover your provider. Don't wait until you've lost peace to realize money was never your master. God was. Choose today. Choose trust over fear. Choose surrender over control. Choose purpose over possessions. Choose God over money. Because at the end of your life, no one will remember the size of your bank account. They will remember the size of your faith. And heaven will echo not how much you earned, but how much you trusted. Your support means everything. If this resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. So let this truth ring in your heart tonight. Money shows your balance, but trust shows your God. And that, my friends, is a wealth that never runs out. In the end, money may build your house, but only trusting God will build your life. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one.